Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world. My name is Hugh Morris. I'm a senior research partner with Yen, and it's my absolute privilege to be the convener for this afternoon's Knowledge Miles lecture in the 695th Lord Mayor's Lectures. The subject this afternoon is a crucial one for the economy and for the world: green steel, the building block of the future. And we will be adopting the usual itinerary for these things. I will make a very small number of remarks and then get out of the way of Julian Verdon, who is our keynote presenter. After he has presented, we will have a question and answer session, which I will be delighted to relay your questions to Julian. Please use the questions tab on the software to submit to me. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Julian Verdon. He's STEM Core Group's Managing Director for Europe and sits on the STEM Core Group's Trading Management and Derivatives Management teams. Julian is also a committee member, past treasurer and chairman of the International Steel Trade Association. He sits on the presidency of Eurometal, the Association of European Distributors, and is a member of the London Metal Exchange Steel Committee. Julian joined the worshipful company of ironmongers by redemption in 2003, became a freeman of the City of London in 2004, joined the livery in 2006, and then the court in 2009. He became master in July 2022, having served as both junior and senior warden. Julian, we are absolutely privileged to have you sharing your thoughts with us this afternoon, and I'm delighted to hand over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Hugh, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining me today to hear about the progress today of green steel. As mentioned, I'm Julian Verdon. I'm a member of the Worshipful Company of Ironmongers. I'm also actively involved in steel trading and distribution business. I've been in the business for over 46 years, so I'm a true ironmonger, or should I say, in fact, a true steelmonger. The ironmongers were pleased to have been asked to give this presentation, as we're committed to our participation in the City of London, our relations with the Lord Mayor and the City Corporation, and we wish to support the Lord Mayor's various initiatives where we can. So what I'm setting out to do today is give you an insight into what green steel is. What is the outlook for green steel over the next few years? A very short brief of what the Ironmongers Company is doing to promote the study of science. And finally, my thoughts as to what we ironmongers, we liverymen, we members of the City of London can do to help all things green going forward, including, of course, green steel. The majority of today's livery companies, as most of you know well, were set up many hundreds of years ago, as those involved in trade looked for representation at court and parliament, and also so that trades could be regulated and that quality could be controlled. Those associations also sought to provide some support in case of hardship to their members and their members' families. Whilst there are some notable exceptions, many of these tasks have today been taken over by governments, global trade associations, global quality control associations, and leaving the liveries with significant funds, which now they predominantly use for education and relief in need. With certain companies accepting because they've remained active in supporting the preservation of their original trades. As such, we ironmongers actively support a variety of works restoring and rebuilding iron structures. Turning to today's subject, green steel, let me first set the scene. Steel is the world's second largest commodity after oil. Global steel production is close to 2 billion tons. This has more than doubled from around 700 million tons when I joined the business 46 years ago. However, in the last 7 years, the volume has leveled off as developed nations see their needs plateauing. Over half, however, of steel globally is produced in China, with production growth today coming from India and Africa. So whilst we're seeing corresponding decreases in production in Europe, the USA and Japan, there remains overcapacity in global steel production. To give you an idea of the might of China, their exports this year are expected to be about 10% of their 1 billion tonnes of production, so around 100 million tonnes, which is more than the size of the total amount of steel produced in the United States of America. The next important question is, what is green steel? Green steel, in fact, should be referred to as low carbon embodied steel. Green is a well understood label and an easy buzzword for people to get behind, but arguably steel can never be truly green. So low embodied carbon steel is deemed by those involved as the more appropriate terminology. Steel production today broadly falls under two types of production methodology. The first, which accounts for approximately 70% of global production, utilizes iron ore and coking coal, which is fired in a blast furnace to produce liquid iron and, with the addition of small amounts of a variety of other metals and elements, subsequently produces virgin steel. The addition of these other elements allows the producer to alter the characteristics depending on its final end use. This production method is carbon emission intensive due to the amount of coking coal used, and typically results in a carbon emission of approximately 2.2 metric tonnes of carbon dioxide per metric tonne of steel produced. The alternative production method, which accounts for approximately 30% of global steel production, utilizes recycled steel scrap being melted in an electric arc furnace, EAF for short, essentially using electricity to melt the recycled scrap. Since this method uses recycled scrap, which is in abundance today and can be efficiently extracted and recycled, and since production can be fueled by cleaner energy, electricity, for example, produced from wind, solar, hydro, nuclear, and wave, EAF production results in much lower levels of carbon emissions. These are typically 20 to 25% of the emissions produced by the previously mentioned blast furnace methodology. This is one of the reasons the alternative production method, which accounts for approximately 30% of global steel production, utilizes recycled steel scrap being melted in an electric arc furnace, or EAF, essentially using electricity to melt the recycled scrap. Since this method uses recycled scrap, which is in abundance today and can be efficiently extracted and recycled, and since production can be fueled by cleaner energy, electricity produced from wind, solar, hydro, nuclear, and wave, EAF production results in significantly lower levels of emission. These are typically 20 to 25% of the emissions produced in the blast furnace method. This is one of the reasons why the share of electric arc furnace production is expected to grow to 50% of total global production in the next 20 years. If you're interested in learning more about steel production, ArcelorMittal, the second largest producer in the world, has a great active diagram on their website. Irrespective of the production method, the steel industry requires the movement of huge quantities of physical commodities around the world. 2.5 billion tonnes of iron ore, 800 million tonnes of coking coal need to be mined and transported every year. 600 million tonnes of recycled scrap needs to be extracted and sent to the electric arc furnaces. And then 2 billion tonnes of finished product, produced steel, needs to be transported to its final destination. This transport happens across the world's seas, waterways, roads and rail every day. So, where does the UK fit into this huge global operation today? There are currently 4 major steel producers in the UK. The largest is Tata, and you will have no doubt heard in the news recently that they have now shut off all their blast furnaces and, together with government support, are investing in a new 3 million tonne electric arc furnace, which they hope to start up in 2028. This leaves Chinese-owned British Steel operating the last remaining blast furnaces in the UK. However, they too are planning to close these and are also seeking government investment to support building a new electric arc furnace there in Scunthorpe. The final 2 producers are Liberty Steel and Celsa, who are both already operating electric arc furnaces. If, or should I say when, Tata and British Steel's electric arc furnace projects are completed, this will mean the UK will have moved entirely to electric arc furnace production, and given the UK's achievements in ceasing the use of coal to produce electricity and other plans around further greening, will mean the UK will be at the forefront of green steel production. This will also mean big changes for the UK scrap industry, which today exports over half the 9 million or so tonnes that they collect. Once the EAFs are running, this scrap will be utilised domestically, having further positive emission savings. This change in the current makeup of the UK industry will cause not only a review of our current scrap businesses, but also a review of how the domestic customers are best served, as today the UK steel industry both imports and exports. The ratio of imports and exports and what is truly needed to be imported and export will affect also the carbon footprint of the UK, as if fewer materials are transported around, less energy is used. Whilst it should be a positive for the UK to be such a low carbon steel producer, it's a struggle today to persuade customers to pay a premium to cover the extra cost of investment in order to achieve this clean product. This, of course, is the same across all countries. So those seeking to produce green steel through the electric arc furnace method will need to have a ready supply of scrap and clean electricity. So why not shift all global production to electric arc furnaces, I hear you thinking? Well, since this method uses recycled scrap as its material input, new production relies on knocking down of old buildings and bridges, recycling of cars, washing machines, etc., etc. And at this rate of recycling, as the rate of recycling is linked to the amount of steel consumed by previous generations, it's limited. The eagle eye amongst you may recall that I said that global steel production when I started in the business 46 years ago was around 700 million tonnes. So with the best will in the world, electric arc furnaces are limited by this constraint, the constraint of the past. Furthermore, electric arc furnace production can only be considered truly 100% green if the energy used to power the production is from wholly sustainable sources. Today, only a small percentage of EAFs utilise 100% sustainable energy, and so there are still significant improvements required within this sector of production. There will also be an ongoing need to produce virgin steel from iron ore and steel, because steel produced from this method can often be used to produce more specialist qualities which are not so easy to produce in an electric arc furnace. Mining and the use of iron ore will therefore continue, and the green challenge for virgin steel is to find an energy efficient way to convert iron ore. As mentioned, the reduction of this iron ore utilises coking coal, which is the carbon intensive part of blast furnace production. This needs to change. And in the most significant development regarding blast furnace production, the use of hydrogen as the reducing agent is taking the forefront. This significantly reduces the emissions in steel production, and there's a very strong drive to achieve this goal. However, available clean hydrogen is limited today, and the cost of producing it is high, so this technology is still in its infancy. One of the reasons for the size of the global steel industry is that there is structural overcapacity caused by governments viewing steel as strategic. Naturally, governments want to be able to have the resources to enable them to build infrastructure, roads, railways, bridges, new towns, buildings, transportation systems, vehicles, trains, cars, lorries, white goods, yellow goods, ships, aeroplanes, weapons, etc. This overcapacity results in frequent pricing pressures caused by steel not only being distributed close to its production, but steel flowing from country to country throughout the world. This frequently depresses pricing and thus steel producers' abilities to operate at a profit. To provide some support, government resorts to trade barriers. The most well-known recently being Trump's Section 232, which was immediately countered by the European Union's safeguard measures. Despite all this, producers often lose money and seek further government help in the form of cheap energy, subsidies, grants, soft loans, on top of the aforementioned trade protections. The low returns for shareholders prove a challenge today for green steel, as whilst there are many green steel initiatives under review, there's a big question mark over how much today's financially stretched world can afford. Our conversion to a green steel world will be inflationary, as it will require huge cash injections. In Europe, hydrogen conversion projects run by SSAB in Scandinavia are considered world-leading, aided by their proximity to iron ore and hydroelectric power generation. There are many others, but the cost of these conversions are estimated by Eurofer, that's the European Association of Steel Manufacturing, to be around 85 billion euros just by 2030 in Europe alone. So furthermore, these projects would need as much electricity, which obviously needs to be green electricity, i.e. not coal-fired, as Belgium's annual consumption twice over. So twice, 100% increase on what today's European industry, steel industry, is using. So huge investments are needed for clean electricity productions and grid systems in order to secure this level of supply. Part of this cost of investment in Europe will be met through carbon taxes, which are effectively a tax on pollution, itself not a bad thing. The logic being that in order to incentivize the development of more costly green steel production initiatives, the cost of dirty carbon intensive steel needs to be increased accordingly. Currently, European producers have to pay to buy carbon credits in order to emit carbon emissions. To ensure fair play versus steel that is imported, a European carbon border adjustment mechanism is being introduced for imports. This should equalize the playing fields in terms of pollution. However, compliance is extremely complicated, and it remains an open question as to how quickly the system will be fully operational. Of course, in the end, all these taxes will result in additional costs to the final end user. The big question being, therefore, who is really willing to pay? Current thinking suggests that people are truly worried about global warming, and that they're worried about polluting, and that they would be willing to pay slightly more for things if that is for the general good. However, purchasing patterns don't seem to suggest the same, nor are these concerns so apparent on the lists of worries advised during elections. It is therefore imperative that all of us who believe in a greener future to educate and support by buying green. One positive is that there is a strong drive from most governments, including those of China and India, who are far behind Europe and America in terms of pollution reduction, to curtail carbon emissions. And many significant global corporations are also pushing for a lower carbon footprint, particularly in areas such as automotive, city and infrastructure construction, retail, and both heavy and light industry. Many corporations are very keen to demonstrate a reducing carbon footprint. So I do believe that we will see the aforementioned growth in electric arc furnace production, together with growth in the supply of green energy to these furnaces. How can the city help support the green initiative? I do believe it's our civic duty to assist in driving the decarbonisation of our planet. I'm a believer in the risks around global warming. In our small way as ironmongers, we are actively supporting the study of science through schools, both directly and through extracurricular activities, through universities and through trade associations. More widely, I believe that the livery companies and the city corporation need to continue to seek improvements to the city's carbon footprint and demonstrate too to government that the city's financial institutions are willing and prepared to invest to achieve such aims. In connection to this, certain city banks are supporting preferred interest rates for the funding of projects utilising green steel, and we would urge more banks and other financial institutions to follow this approach. To finish on a positive note, whilst it's clear that the path to green will be a challenging one, the technology is being honed to make this option competitive, and therefore I truly believe that we will achieve an environment where, in the very reasonably short term at the very least, the UK and European steel producers will be low carbon steel producers, and to return to the title of the lecture, they will be green. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Julian, thank you very much indeed for an extremely interesting and erudite dissertation on green steel. We certainly do have some comments and questions, which I'll be delighted to relay. First, Michael Sansom echoes your point when he says scrap isn't an abundant resource. It's a constrained resource today, with only sufficient supply to meet 1/3 of global demand for steel. And you have described the constraints on scrap being historic steel consumption. Do you think that we will see increasing amounts of scrap that are able to go back into the steel industry?
Yes, I do, because if you look at the graph of steel consumption growth or steel production growth, either way, because they're roughly the same, because while steel does get stocked, it doesn't get stocked that much. We've seen it grow, as I said, from 700 million 45 years ago to 2 billion or so today. So let's say for the last 7 years, it's been at close to 2 billion. And therefore, over time, whilst we probably won't see it grow significantly more, the total amount of use, that amount of scrap coming on stream will increase. So I would say that we're never going to really seek to make all steel from scrap, but I would say that it's not at all unlikely that 1 billion tons a year of scrap will be available over the next 10 to 15 years. And it's the 20-year horizon, which I mentioned, for the EAFs to move from 30% to 50% of total production.
Thank you very much. And bear with me with this one. I've got a slightly simple question, but there's a bit of background to go with it. So Mark Cook asks, what's Julian's view on Stegra in Sweden, which is making virgin steel using green hydrogen and renewable energy? Due to go live in 2026 in Boden, northern Sweden, Stegra is building Europe's first greenfield steel mill in 50 years. But this will be a steel mill unlike any other seen before. It will produce green steel in a fully integrated process, replacing coal with green hydrogen and using electricity from renewable sources. Compared to steel making in Europe, this promises to deliver emissions reductions of up to 95%. The 6.5 billion euros of funding secured by Stegra means construction is well underway and full-scale production is scheduled to start in 2026.
I mean,
the question was, what's your view on that?
What's my view on that? I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, you know, I've seen their presentation. They've spoken at conferences where I've also been participating and speaking. It looks as if it can work. However, with all these things, they have to have funding from all of their shareholders, and there are still risks around that. I couldn't say whether, with hand on heart, that I know that they will succeed in producing their first steel through the line in 2026. But I probably will be seeing them at a conference early next week, and I'll certainly ask that question. But to roll back a bit, the positioning of Stegra is great because you've got iron ore in Sweden, you've got hydroelectric power in Sweden, you've got plenty of land in Sweden, you've got access to sea in Sweden, so and to transport. So all of those things make for a very good environment in which to build a plant like this. It wouldn't be so easy to build a plant like that in the UK. It really does work well up there. But 6.5 billion funds of money, 6.5 billion of funding is a lot of money. I have heard them say it's all in place. But with these things, you have to sort of wait and see.
Thank you very much. Shane Drinian asks a question relating to hydrogen. And he says, it seems like there are a number of hard to abate industries that will be competing with steel, aviation, for instance, for access to hydrogen in order to decarbonize. Is hydrogen production going to be available at the scale necessary for the greening of the steel industry?
And that is a big worry. And, you know, I think I mentioned that there's going to have to be a very significant investment. And producing hydrogen from which is often produced from using a lot of electricity, and it's no good at all if it's just using oil or gas or worse, coal. It needs to be really hydroelectric, wind power, can be nuclear power. It's going to need a huge investment. And this is the challenge. I mean, I would say that the question is very pertinent. I certainly can't be sure that there's going to be enough government support in order to secure adequate hydrogen for all these projects. But I think, for example, to come back to something like Stegra, you know, where they're going to effectively do it pretty much on site with their own hydroelectric power, that's what's really needed.
And Gert van der Elst asks, how does hydrogen, in terms of reduction, compare with coke in terms of carbon emissions?
That's a very technical question. I'm afraid that I'm not sort of a technician, so I'm not going to attempt to answer that one. But yeah, so I mean, basically, what you do is you heat up the iron ore hugely, which is what you do with coking coal, and hydrogen. You can do the same thing. You want to look at the hydrogen bomb? That's pretty hot. So that's effectively what the process is. I mean, blast furnace technology, you know, has been around for a very long time. One of our own, well, not quite one of our own, but we like to think of him one of our own because his grandson or great grandson was an ironmonger. Bessemer, of course, did the first decent quality blast furnace some 250 years ago. So the technology is pretty simple. It's been around for a long time. It's just about creating a jolly hot environment for that iron ore to be separated out.
Thank you very much. Daniel Daescu asks if the steel coming out of the electric furnaces is not going to be mingled with carbon dioxide and other necessary metals, how will we get the same quality from that sort of green steel?
Well, as I said, there needs to be two, going forward, I believe, two methods of steel production. One is green hydrogen-based blast furnace product, and one is electric arc furnace product. Now, electric arc furnaces are fairly sophisticated, and in smaller volumes, they can produce some quite high quality material. Our own Liberty here in the UK is producing in Rotherham high quality material for the aeronautical industry. But it is accepted that for the highest of specifications, blast furnace technology is better, and that's why there will always need to be some blast furnace technology, but a blast furnace production. But electric arc furnaces are producing 600 million or 700 million tons today, and that is a very good quality. I'm in the business, we're buying a lot of it. It's absolutely fine, but it's a question of what you're using it for, and we're putting
Thank
it
you very
into.
much.
Yeah.
Second question from Michael Sansom. As a developed economy, it's easy for the UK to transition to scrap-based EAF production, but demand growth is in developing economies who do not have the stock of scrap. Who should pay for the decarbonising of primary steelmaking in those economies?
Well, that's rather like us paying for the Brazilians, for example, not to chop down their rainforests. It's a very fair question. Interestingly, the cost of putting up electric arc furnaces is lower than the cost of putting up blast furnaces. You can put up smaller units. So, for example, we buy steel, we trade steel all around the world. We're buying steel from lots of developing countries, and many of them we're buying from electric arc furnace producers. So actually, I'm not really answering the question. What I'm saying is that there are a lot of electric arc furnaces in the developing countries. A separate question is, should the developed countries be encouraging developing countries to produce greener steel, and should they be subsidizing them to do that? That's a very difficult question. That's a very politically charged question. I'm not sure. I can't see how it's going to work. It would be too open to abuse. So probably you just have to let market forces decide.
Thank you very much. And a follow-up question from Gert van der Elst. How competitive are we here in the UK versus the rest of Europe and versus the rest of the world?
Our problem in the UK has been the cost of our electricity. We've got scrap, so we should be able to. So, for example, today it's quite feasible for 20,000 tons of scrap to be collected, put on a boat, sent to Turkey, produced in Turkey, and then sent back here in the form of reinforcing bar to come into London, for example, to help build skyscrapers. Now, that, of course, is an awful lot of transportation and handling. So there's every reason to believe that the UK can produce using scrap-based production effectively. Celsa, if you look at they're based in South Wales, producing reinforcing bars and various other products, have been operating profitably recently. I mean, the market's very tough at the moment. I don't know what their numbers look like today, but we're not very competitive compared to Turkey in terms of labour costs and in terms of land costs. So that does cause problems for the UK, but it certainly makes sense with the transportation savings that are going to be possible with using the scrap locally for the UK to be able to supply product to the UK customers at a good price.
Thank you. And a follow-up question from Shane Drinian. What are Julian's opinions on the use of low emission materials like cross-laminated timber in construction versus steel? Are these types of materials seen as a serious alternative to steel in the construction industry?
I mean, I'm terribly sorry, but I'm going to have to pass on that one. And obviously, being a steel man, I'd love to just say simply that steel's the best. Go for steel. I've not looked at that as a technical alternative. We're supplying steel to building merchants and building construction corporations all the time, and I think that today steel still is probably the cheapest and the most effective and the strongest alternative.
Thank you. Samuel Marchand asked, what do we need to do to develop the green steel technology and industry in the UK to produce high-grade steel at competitive prices?
Well, we've actually chosen to go down the electric arc furnace route at the moment because I don't see that we've got the environment here like when we were talking about the Swedish projects and SSAB's projects to have the hydro and the iron ore right next door to production in order to build the most effective blast furnace technology. So to produce high grade product, we just need to be at the forefront of all technological advancements and probably focus, like Liberty are doing, on small volume, high price product where they can afford to take the time and play around with the metals and the chemical compositions in order to get a really top product. But that does cost a lot of money. Steel, for example, goes from say £500 a ton to £25,000 a ton for a very, very high tech piece of steel that's going into the aerospace industry. Now, we've dealt with in our corporation all of those products over the years, and clearly you've got a lot of time to play with if you're trying to produce something valued at £25,000 a ton, as opposed to 500, which you've got to knock out really quick.
Thank you. We've probably time for one more question, so I will indulge in controlling the chair, as it were, by making it my question, which is we've seen as of yesterday that we've got a government that is very keen to have an active investment policy in UK infrastructure. If you could have the Prime Minister and the Chancellor sitting opposite you, what would be your message in terms of the way that the UK government could, should, ought to encourage and invest in green steel in the UK to make us a world leader?
I think that's a very, very good. Oh, have we got a microphone issue?
I can
Sorry.
still hear you happily, Julian. I can still hear you.
It just said it's asking me to switch to a new microphone. Okay. So to answer that question, I would say to the PM and the Chancellor that if we need to produce steel in the UK firstly. So although I'm a trader and I buy it and sell it everywhere around the world, I strongly believe we have to have steel produced in the UK for a variety of reasons, defence not being the only one. I would say to them that what they have to do is they really have to build a team that properly understand the steel market and the needs of the steel producers. And they're going to have to be prepared to structure any funds that they are going to inject into the business to separate out a proper cleanup, because obviously there's areas of steelworks that are dreadfully polluted and need to be cleansed, and they need to put funds specifically for that so that can be dealt with efficiently. And then they need to make sure that the funds that they invest in new production are in the right place. Many of the problems we have today are because the power in the past of the unions or the intransigence of the old management left steel being produced probably in the wrong places. And it was crazy to have the best blast furnace we had, which was in Teesside, being the blast furnace that got shut, and the ones that are in Scunthorpe, the ones that were left open. But it was because the production past the blast furnace stage, the finished end of the production, was in the wrong place. So what you have to do is you almost have to say, let's redraw the map and come out and say, right, what would be the best, not the best for Joe Bloggs who's working there or convenient because that's what's there at the moment, but what's the best for the transport system we have, the port system we have, and where the steel needs to be actually used.
Thank you very much indeed, Julian, both for your observations and for skillfully answering the questions from our audience. Very much appreciated. Now, the 695th Lord Mayor has but a few days left in office, but he does have a few days left in office. And there are two further Knowledge Miles lectures next week on Monday, the 4th of November, the early railway age and its influence on the law of England and Wales. And on Wednesday, the 6th of November, Can AI Save Us? How Doctor Data Could Be the Future of Health. And slightly risking a sort of self-interested plug, for those of you who are members of Xien's FS Club, on Tuesday, 12th of November 2024, there's going to be a fascinating session on the Great Reversal, Britain, China, and the 400-year contest for power. And I commend all that to you. So it only remains for me to thank Julian once more for an extremely interesting observations and help in understanding this topic this afternoon. I greatly appreciate that. My thanks to the audience for attending, and I wish all of you an extremely good afternoon, evening, or day, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you.